Lily, please.
Shalom. I'm happy to see you all with us for our first panel for 2026. My name is Professor Lily Zamir. I'm the academic director and the co-founder of WISC and also an active academic in Israel. This panel, which is our first one, is in collaboration with Remember the Women Institute, headed by Dr. Rochelle Saidel and Professor Sonja M. Hedgepeth. We are going to have a slight change in our program, which is that after my introductory, Dr. Rochelle and Professor Sonja will deliver their lecture, and Marta is going to conclude. I wish us all a very interesting and challenging evening. I chose to talk about the female body because I think that this is a good opening to our program. And I was wondering about the female body, gendered violence from scripture to the Holocaust and October the 7th. This is a kind of introductory, not really a lecture, but still I think it's a quite important overview of the valuation of against women's body throughout history, especially during wartime and genocide. From early biblical narrative to modern war and conflicts, sexual violence against women is portrayed as a deliberate act of dominion, a clear symbol of conquest, and an erasure of identity. The military historian Professor Martin van Creveld, known for his misogyny, once said, "Better to be raped than to die in the battlefield." Well, I believe that all of us here at least can agree that this statement is both dangerous and wrong. The female body has long been viewed both as a symbol of reproduction and a source of disaster, not just during wartime. Throughout history, from early monotheistic religions and to crusades, and then to the 20th century's two world wars, totalitarian regimes, and ongoing conflicts until nowadays, women's body have always been used as a kind of battleground. Let's start with the Bible. The biblical canon, the core text of Jewish and Christian tradition. The law about the beautiful captive woman. In Hebrew it is Yefat Toar, which is already in the Deuteronomy 21, lines 10 till 14. And then to the Babylonian Talmud, Kiddushim 21, and other halachic texts. A woman captured in war is permitted to the conqueror, not as an individual, but as a part of the spoils. However, unlike other lots, she cannot be sold afterwards. She is tamed, but not tradable. In Hebrew language itself, we have the horrible idea of violence to women when we say that we conquer a woman, which means she accepted our proposal to be her husband or fiancé. Lichbosh isha, you conquer a woman. Both types of conquest produce results, literally. If you conquer the land, then you have crops. If you conquer a woman, she breeds offspring. Both are viewed as the conqueror's property to do whatever he wishes. Throughout history, women's body was always raped, mutilated, slaughtered, and the conquerors decided. Names, location, dates change, but never the concept of the female body as an enemy that remained always the same. In the 90s of the last century, international law views the rape of women as a marker for genocide and war crime. Yet, these acts still occur. They occurred in Rwanda, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then, of course, October 7th in Gaza. In each case, women were raped, murdered, despite the law, as a part of a ritual of violence rooted in an hatred, something very deep. If you conquered the woman, you conquered the nation. You humiliated the whole nation. Because conquering a woman, it means that the men who survived the war failed. They failed to protect their land. They failed to protect their women. They failed to protect their religion. The failure is horrible, and the price is paid by women's body. In patriarchal societies, the shame runs so deep that surviving women often were killed by their own families just to hide the shame that they were raped. Therefore, women were here betrayed twice. First, by the men of their own family, country, tribe, who failed to protect her. Then, against by men who executed her because of being assaulted. That's why very few women dared to speak out after being raped. Their survival became a threat to the patriarchal honor. If you are raped, my honor is in trouble. I'm ashamed. I, as the man of the tribe, the land, and the family. In Israel, we can assume that modernity shields rape survivors from rejection or stigma. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. People often say and ask women that have survived, how come that you survived? How come that you were only raped and not killed? And I stress only. Holocaust survivors had to face the same questions very often, and usually they respond with silence or suicide, which was already advised by rabbis in the Talmud. Rabbi Yehuda said that Rabbi Shmuel told him a story about 400 young women that thought that they are in danger to be raped. They all climbed to a high roof and jumped into the sea to drown. Rabbi Tam said, if there is a danger of disgrace, it is a mitzvah to damage oneself. Hence, to commit suicide. It's in the Talmud, Tosafot Avodah Zarah, for those who need the source. One of the most well-known legends related to women in the Holocaust to support this theme, which means to better to commit suicide than become raped, is the story of the 93 Beit Yaakov students aged 14 to 22 in Krakow ghetto, who gathered in a room and took their own lives because they were in danger that the Nazis will rape them. The legend was spread through rumors and misinformation, in spite of the very embarrassing historical fact that it never occurred. Yet it troubled the Orthodox community, which had a strong reason to defend, since the female womb is a national source, a national treasure, and has a national importance. So it must be protected at all costs, even if the lives are in risk. Rabbi Moshe Bloy said, these martyrs, referring to those 93 girls who the story never happened, but still he refers to it. He says those martyrs gave us in their death much more than they could give in their lives. Yad Vashem, of course, had announced that the event never took place, And survivors from the great ghetto of Krakow was not a very big ghetto, so people usually knew each other. None of them heard about the story, but still, the story had a message. The message conveyed a myth, and the myth conveyed another message. A research done by Dr. Nomi Levenkron showed that the story is based on another story, a fiction, but by Yud Lamed Peretz, which is called The Three Gifts. The third gift refers to the suicide story of the Beit Yaakov girls. Yet, the story existed, and even though that it was written in Hungarian Yiddish, which was not the spoken Yiddish in the ghetto of Krakow. After the liberation, women had to face lots of unpleasant questions and judgment regarding the fact how did they survive. One of the women that I interviewed for another study of mine in about 23 years ago told me, she was from Hungary, she was an Hungarian Jew, and she told me that after liberation, an Hungarian rabbi visited us. We were about 38 young women, survivors, and we had nothing. We were very thin, very sick, and extremely sad. We didn't know what's going to be with us tomorrow, who is going to take care of us. And suddenly the rabbi came. We felt so happy. We felt that maybe he's going to have a good message, some news, something to support us, to strengthen us. But no, the only thing that he wanted to know if we are clean and pure. And he explained us that our cleanness and purity is the most important thing for the future of the Jewish nation. Our personal future did not interest him at all. We know so many stories about women, Jews and non-Jews, during the war in Poland and other occupied territories that had to buy bread, freedom, and sometimes a roof or hiding place or survival for their children, and they had to pay with their bodies. So many Holocaust stories we know, and still so little testimonies about women in first person singular saying, this is what happened to me. And it's very interesting because even after years and years, women felt embarrassed telling what happened to them. A major challenge if we want to study sexual violence during the Holocaust and it's the same, the Hamas attacks, that people want always to have the golden proof from the victim. Well, most of the surviving victims can't give us the golden proof. It's a story told by the victim, and we have to believe her without any historical questions or judgment. Dr. Halbertal made a study about victims of genocide and rape, female victims. And she said that there is a huge difference between an organized rape during the war or individual rape on the street, a dark street, somebody finds you and rape you. She said that usually rape that are organized as a national act have the same pattern. Women are mutilated. Pregnant women's belly are cut open. Breasts are cut off while the victim is still alive. Bodies are discarded. These are horrors that happen in genocide, not in private rapes. Carol Rittner, in her groundbreaking study in 1993, revealed that many survivors felt that they were somehow betrayed twice. Once because they couldn't save their own family, the ones that they really liked. And then, after the war, that those who survived tried to judge them. I think that very few women have the guts to testify after what happened and say, this is what happened to me, because they were afraid from people who will listen and judge. And still, we have to bear in mind one huge difference, which will, I think, open the next sessions. The Holocaust, unlike all other genocides, is very different because most of genocides are connected to a geopolitical conflict. It's a war and it's a result of war. Hatred between nations, that land is involved. Jews and Roma during the Holocaust had no geopolitical conflict, not with the Germans, not with other European communities, and still they were slaughtered and raped. And I think that this is the moment to conclude with Primo Levi's words. No one will survive. No one will remain to tell. And if one person survives and tells, no one will believe her or him. I think that our role, and this is one of the main goals of WIS, is to believe and to give voice to those women. Thank you, and now we can start our program. Our first speakers are two. We have two speakers at the same time, and it is Professor Sonja M. Hedgepeth and, of course, Dr. Rochelle G. Saidel, the founders of Remember the Women Institute, which is a non-profit institute. Dr. Rochelle is well known for most of us. She's the founding executive director of Remember the Women Institute. She's a very well-known, very well-established scholar of Holocaust, especially women in the Holocaust, Jewish women. She wrote books, co-edited a book with Professor Sonja Hedgepeth about the topic. She was in the past fellow researcher in Yad Vashem, and she, of course, was the one who had the, how should I say, not only coordinator, but much more. She was the one who thought that it's important to have the exhibition violated about women in the Holocaust. The exhibition was very important. It was really a landmark for all Holocaust studies and connecting them to art. So this is our first speaker, and with her will speak Professor Sonja, who is not only her friend, but they work together and they devote many of their writings to women in the Holocaust. So I think that this is the high time to start their lecture. It will be very interesting because they are going to do it both together, and they are going to talk about sexual violence about Jewish women during the Holocaust. Do we believe them now? Of course, if we have questions to the speakers, it will be after the third lecture delivered. And here I want to say special thank you to Daniel, Rochelle's son, who is going to give us the technical help. So let's start. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'm starting, but okay, now we did it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Lily. Thank you, Batya Bruton, for inviting us and getting this together. And yes, thank you, Daniel, who is my son, Daniel Wolk, for the tech help so that Sonja Hedgepeth, who is Professor Emerita in Tennessee and is in Tennessee, and I am in Jerusalem, and we're talking to each other. So it's really good tech. And I'm really so glad we're doing this together because we've been working on sexual violence during the Holocaust since the very beginning. I, of course, thank Women in the Holocaust International Studies Center for inviting Remember the Women Institute to uh, co-sponsor this event, and I think it's very important. Sonja and I met in 1996 at a NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, summer seminar in Brandeis University. And the next year, I founded Remember the Women Institute, and Sonja's been on the executive board as well as my sidekick ever since then. And so it's our 30th anniversary of having dialogue. So we thought we should have a dialogue. And it's 29th anniversary of Remember the Women Institute. Now, about a decade after we met, we decided to create a book about sexual violence against Jewish women during the Holocaust. So, Sonja, maybe you'll tell us what happened that led to this first spark in 2006.
2006, Rochelle and I were at a conference at Yad Vashem, and our topic was Beyond Anne Frank or Anne Frank, because women were really not included in the research very much. And we have some people in the audience today I know who are people who started the work on this, in particular Carol Rittner. And so at some point, Rochelle said something about rape of women in Ravensbrück, and a very prominent uh, Holocaust scholar in the audience said, Rochelle, you can't say that. And so we left our session and we're like, what is he talking about? Uh, Women weren't supposedly raped during the Holocaust. Murder, yes. Rape, no. And so that was the first idea, because there were other scholars working on this. We had heard them. So this was the idea to make a co-edited book, an anthology on sexual violence against Jewish women during the Holocaust. And Rochelle, why was it important to work on this?
Well, before I say that, I want to say you were very nice, but he very rudely interrupted me and stood up and yelled at me in the middle of a presentation. And I also want to add that that workshop, Beyond Anne Frank, was the first time that Yad Vashem ever did a workshop on women. So why was it important to do this? We had been dealing with women's experiences, all kinds of experiences, biological differences from men, societal, cultural, gender related, making sure women's stories were part of the narrative. And then we started naturally to think about women as victims of sexual violence. And really, in the beginning, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence to find. You had to really look for it. The documentation was hard to find here and there. I personally, myself, when I started working on Ravensbrück women's concentration camp early, I thought that this issue of sexual violence and rape was maybe, I don't know, rare or sporadic or not always, or maybe one woman here, there. It wasn't like something huge. But by now, I've changed my mind. We've changed our minds, and we really believe that it was quite prevalent in a lot of different ways. And if you think about the entry process, which you've probably read about or seen in a movie or something, the entrance process to a concentration camp is sexual violation for a woman without any question. And I remember that Nava Semmel of blessed memory, who was part of our book and came to one of the talks about it, but she said that, and I mean, yeah, I knew that, but I never really thought about it. And she just opened our eyes. Yes, any woman that came into a concentration camp was sexually violated. Sonja?
So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this book, and there are three uh, people, and there might be more of you in the audience, and I just didn't see you, but I want to acknowledge Monica Flaschka, Eva Fogelman, and Ellen Ben Safer. And women had been working on this. It was not it was something that just wasn't brought to the forefront. Women were raped during Kristallnacht. There were bordellos in concentration camps. And sure, the argument is Jewish women weren't used in the bordellos. Where's the proof? Where are the documents? And it keeps going back to this. When it had gone, where are the documents? So certainly in scholarship and research, we have come much, we've come a long way, baby, as we said, used to say. But certainly there are great advances that have been made. And is there anything else about the book, Rochelle, that I should say?
I don't know if you should
It
say
was
it,
the
but
first one. It was the first one.
um, well, we're not going to go through the laundry list of the various kinds of sexual violence. We can do it at the end if there are questions, but
No,
most
and
the audience
besides,
knows about it. I don't think we need to
exactly.
do that. But again, to say this was 2010, it's kind of late if you think about it. And it was the first book that was published specifically on this subject of sexual violence. So I think it's important to say it's good that you acknowledged some of our wonderful chapter authors that are here with us now. And if we left anybody out, I don't know, raise your hand or put it in the chat. And I didn't have a chance to look through it. I'm glad you did, Sonja. But the scholars that we approached for this book, they were from various fields. We'd met some of them at conferences and you know people, and so we asked people who we thought would be appropriate for being in the book. But I think that also it was not just history. There was literature, there was film, there was psychology, uh, and it was an intergenerational group of authors, and it was an international group of authors and an interdisciplinary group. So I think that's important to point out about the book. And anything you want to add?
No, I would like to say that beyond, and Lily mentioned this already, but I think it's important to emphasize that also then this went beyond academic research efforts, and that it also art and theater have started to incorporate thinking about sexual violence during the Holocaust. And ours was particularly sexual violence against Jewish women during the Holocaust. And it continues to be that, okay, we'll believe women, but perhaps not Jewish women. And we might come back to that later and maybe in some questions that you have, plural. But yeah, so art and theater, anything there, Rochelle?
Well, yeah, and I mean what you just said with not believing Jewish women, I'm not going to go into it at all, but we certainly found out about it again in after October 7, 2023, and Lily also mentioned it. So yes, it's a continuing issue, evidently. And just to mention briefly, which Lily already mentioned, in 2018, remember the Women Institute organized an international group art exhibition, Violated Women in Holocaust and Genocide. Dr. Batya Bruton was the curator, I was the coordinator, and it was at the Rondell Feldman Gallery in New York, which is a very prestigious art gallery in Soho. And we had some famous artists among the artists there. We had Judy Chicago with her Holocaust project. Boris Lurie, who was a Latvian survivor who's very well known, Nancy Sparrow, who was a great feminist artist, and many other artists. A lot of them were daughters of survivors who were Israeli. And it was a wonderful show. We also had Gil Yefman, who was a young Israeli artist with his crochet sculpture of a sex slave in a bordello, which was spectacular. And as far as theater goes, Cynthia Cooper, who's been working with Remember the Women Institute for years for our Women Theater and the Holocaust Project, she actually wrote a short play that was performed several times in New York, not just for us, on the difficulty of working with this subject, and nobody wanted to admit that it was going on, as Sonja more or less said. So I think that some attitudes have changed. I think it's maybe our work contributed to it, and I think Sonja wants to say something about that.
So there was a question in the chat. Would you say the gallery and the exhibition name again, please?
Oh, I'll say more than that because you can see the catalog for free on the Remember the Women Institute's website. There is a print version, but there's also a free digital version. It's called Violated Women in Holocaust and Genocide. And that's because we included some art from several later genocides, Rwanda, Sudan, and the Yazidi that come to mind without looking further. But at rememberwomen.org, you're free to see this violated catalog.
Yeah, so I also want to remind us of the times that, and it was Ellen Ben Safer who wrote that at the time in the past, people were not willing to listen, and researchers really didn't know to listen for other things. And here we're talking about sexual violence against women during the Holocaust. So I sort of lost my train of thought because it started to get interesting in my head. But I'd like to point out that previous critics of the subject matter had come around, and that took not 2 days, not 2 months. It took a long time. And there was also in the area of research or going to conferences, there was also this kind of feeling of what you have to say about this is not valid. And that means you as a researcher are not valid. And so it was very difficult, but we have come beyond that because you'll hear later, I mean, soon, Marta will be speaking, which is a testimony, I think, to the fact that we do believe women. So, in any case, I would like to also say that it's very strange to me that Israeli women aren't believed, and in particular in light of October 7th. Do you have any thoughts about that, Rochelle?
Well, my thoughts are, I mean, times have changed, so I was a little bit surprised about that. I mean, Lily referred to it, and the victims. It was a different time, but sex wasn't talked about. There was shame. I'm going back, to Holocaust survivors, and in the Nuremberg trials. Rape wasn't even a crime against humanity. It was a long time ago. And then we come to now, like 2023, with the times that have changed, and the women weren't believed. And we're watching our TV, and we're watching one of the victims, and we all know her name, and she's being shoved into a vehicle to take to Gaza, and her sweatpants are covered with blood. We're all looking at her. So why aren't we, I mean, I'm believing her, but why aren't people believing her? It's crazy. It's just crazy to me. Romy Gonen just gave testimony, another hostage that was freed, about being sexually violated. It's a mystery to me. Um, I can't explain it. I think it's better now. I think it was, I think, for example, some of the old Shoah Foundation, we watched so many of them. The early interviewers, I heard it with my own ears that a woman is starting to say that she was raped. You could see that she's starting to say it. And the interviewer says, and what did your family have for Shabbat dinner before the Holocaust? I am not making this up. So, okay, we've come a long way, and I guess we have further to come. But okay, I don't know how much more time we have, but somebody should tell us
Take
if we
two
have to
steps
end.
forward. We take 2 steps forward and 1.5 back. So I think that this also, I want to also say that when we started, there were personal fears. I'll
That's
speak
what I
for
was going to say
myself,
to do that. Yeah.
that I felt first this topic totally frightening. It was frightening to me. And I thought, wow, if I do this, I'm going to call rape to me. That is, it's going to come and it's going to snatch me. And I kid you not, it was at an emotional level. It's living in a country where a woman doesn't go out and walk by herself across an empty parking lot at night. And so that kind of ingrained uh, attitude, it's a fear, really also, I had to overcome that in order to do what Rochelle and I did.
And just to add to that and complement it, I think I want to say that it wasn't easy to do this book and this work and this subject, and it was very important that we did it together. I don't think I could have done it by myself, and I think Sonja would say the same thing. And now there's all these kind of support groups and therapy and whatever for first responders and for victims and for whatever. But we were each other's support system through this, and it was it was tough, but it was good to be together. I don't know if you want to add a little personal touch to that, and then we're
I
going to
do.
end because our
I
time is
do.
up. Go
You
ahead.
do have
I
to
want,
conclude, so try
this
to.
is the
We're
conclusion. Don't
concluding.
worry.
This is
This
the
is the
conclusion.
conclusion. We know. And that was that. And we had wasn't an anthology, so we had different authors working on this, and everyone may have had her own or his, Anatoly had their experience, but for us there were really simple things that were important. For instance, when we were working on the book, you editing and fixing things, we had a uniform that we appeared in, and we actually had a house drink that would conclude our work day. Just saying.
Right, because we worked together for a whole summer together in Jerusalem working on this book. But we're going to conclude now because we have to. And thank everybody. And we're going to see what happens in the questions and the chat. I hope you think that we made a contribution to the subject. And I just met a young student here from Brandeis, and he said, "Oh, I had your book and I made Aliyah and I had to donate it and I promised him another copy because he's very excited to have it." So I was very excited to be able to give it to him. So the question is with whoever's watching us now, does it matter? Does it make a difference to know more about sexual violence during the Holocaust? And we thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you very
everyone.
much. It was a very interesting talk. And before we are moving to our third um, presentation, I would like just to mention two things. Number one, all the questions will be at the end of the third presentation. And also, I don't remember because, as my daughter calls me, I'm Sunny Lily. I'm getting senile sometimes already. If I have forgotten to thank Batya Brutin for all her help and for being such a good friend through all the years in WISC and her contribution to this specific panel. So thank you, Bhaktya. And now we are moving to our third speaker, Professor Marta Havryshko. I think that I mispronounced your name. Did I? She's an
No,
historian. Can you correct me, please, Marta?
Marta Havryshko. It's very
Havryshko.
Ukrainian. Yeah, Havryshko.
Havryshko.
It works.
Havryshko, who is
Yes.
an historian, and she's a visiting assistant professor in Holocaust pedagogy and anti-Semitism studies at the Castle Center of Holocaust and Genocide in Clark University, and she spoke about it at the beginning. She has published many studies about sexual violence against women during World War II and the Holocaust, and also the Ukrainian nationalist movement and sexual violence during that war and genocide. So, Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lily. Can I kindly ask you, do you see my presentation?
Yes, we see it.
It's
Yeah, thank
okay.
you so much, Lily. So great. I am very honored to be here and very pleased to be here as a presenter because I must admit, as a Ukraine scholar, I learned from the book of Sonja and Rochelle so much and from other scholars in the West because in Ukraine, I was a pioneer actually in studying sexual violence during the Holocaust. And I actually suffered a lot because of that in Ukraine. I suffered anti-Semitism and I was, I was blamed for anti-patriotic study in Ukraine. And I was forced basically to leave Ukraine, firstly because of the war, and secondly because of this peer pressure. Um, it was very difficult for me to develop my book that I'm developing here in US on sexual violence during the Holocaust in Ukraine, because my main focus in this book are local perpetrators of sexual violence against Jewish women, primarily and girls, and nowadays I include Jewish men and boys. So local perpetrators are not only members of local auxiliary police, local administration under Nazis, but also ordinary men who abuse their power. Those also who were aid givers, who positioned themselves as rescuers, and they abused their powers and demanded sexual favors from those vulnerable Jewish women and girls. So nowadays, here in US, I'm trying to develop this book interrupted by war and my rescue operation because I was trying to rescue my son and then my husband. And here now we are in Clark, and where I'm teaching Holocaust as well. I'm teaching anti-Semitism and racism, and also I have entire course about sexual violence in war and genocide, and sexual violence during the Holocaust. It's a big part of this course, and I include not only violence against Jewish women and girls, but also violence against queer people, including gay men and other queer people and lesbian women. So at the beginning of our event, Lily wonderfully actually presented those functions of sexual violence and why primarily Jewish women are targeted during the Holocaust. Yes, so sexual violence in every ethnic conflicts, yeah, and every war and genocide is a tool of terror and intimidation, punishment and retaliation, reward, bonding between fighters, compensation for fighters, especially if fighters are recruiters from different localities. It's a method of torture, and it has economic functions, and also it's a tool of ethnic cleansing and genocide, and especially during the Holocaust, when we are talking about forced abortion, when we are talking about medical examination, medical experiments, for example, forced abortion, and so on and so forth. It's a clear sign of reproductive violence. It's a clear sign of genocidal sexual violence. And why women, Lily talked about this, women body play a very symbolic role in national narrative. It's not only, some specific, body, female body. It's a body of entire nation. It's a body that represents nation, that reproduce nation biologically. It's a keeper of national honor and the honor of its defenders. And also, when we are talking about these patriarchal gender norms, women's bodies are perceived as a property of enemy men. That's why it's a battlefield, as Professor Zamir pointed out. That's why it's an instrument of male-male communication. When you violate women's body, you send a message to the enemy man that he is not fully man because he can't protect a woman's body. So we have these very gendered power dynamic. Here I put the most common forms of sexual violence during the Holocaust. And of course, those forms are not limited only to rape and attempted rape, but also forced nudity, sexual slavery, sexualized torture, forced penetration with objects, forced sterilization, abortions, prostitution, castration, and genital mutilation. But today, I want to concentrate on women's agency. When I started to dig this topic, I was full of frustration and anger. As a woman, I constantly thought about this pain of women that they suffer. I thought about their children who were in many cases witnesses of this violence. I cried a lot, but then I started to think about agency of those women, very limited agency and very limited choices. But I today, when I witness so many conflicts, and when after 7 October we witnessed and hear stories of women in captivity, women on this music festival, Nova Festival, who were violated, and we listen to their stories. Once again, we are trying to understand how women can survive and can survive this violence and find capability to live further and be inspiration to other women with a similar experience. So when I listen to the stories of survivors of sexual violence during the Holocaust, I listen many stories when women we are trying to be involved in active resistance. For example, like Sonja Diamond from Volyn region, she explained when she was trying to resist to one Pole who pretend to be her rescuer, but at the same time was trying to violate her. But we should be very careful when we listen to these stories, because we can be in this trap that there are good women who resist, and there are other women who fail to resist somehow, yes? And then we have stories like the story of Raisa, 13-year-old Ukraine girl from Nova Pavlivka, Odessa Oblast, who was violated by her fellow villager. he was 18 years old and he became a policeman under German occupation. And he raped her when he was her guardian during Nazi period. And he raped him. And after the war, he became a main witness in his case. And she attempted several times to tell the judges, to tell the state prosecutor that she actually was violated by him. But nobody trusted her. They constantly asked her questions. Why why nobody heard her screaming? Why nobody saw any signs on her body of active resistance? And what I witnessed in this court material from 1954, this is phenomenon that we can call nowadays the rape culture. And we still are dealing with this rape culture in justice system in our everyday life, when survivors of sexual violence should prove that they resisted actively, that this wasn't a sex, this was actually a rape, this was a violence. And many survivors, Holocaust survivors, dealt with this rape culture after the war. That's why we should be very careful when we are talking, when we are listening to survivors and dealing with their testimonies. And we should remember that those who survive sexual violence could choose the strategy to not to resist in order to survive, actually. And this strategy is a resistance by itself, because survival is a resistance to the Holocaust. When we listen to testimonies of Holocaust survivors, we see many stories that belong to so-called gray zone, with many women in attempt to survive and to rescue their loved ones, their parents, other members of Jewish group, of their friends, use their body as a survival tool. So Galina Klotzman from Antonovka camp in Kyiv Oblast described her friend from the camp, and she said she chose this strategy. So she used her body as a bribe, as a sexual bribe. So we are dealing with nowadays Anna Haikova and other scholars call sexual barter. So it was, as we see from this quote, probably the phenomenon that we can call sexual barter, when in circumstances of very limited choices and very limited agencies, women were trying to resist Holocaust and to survive by any means. But it doesn't mean that women enjoy this choice. It doesn't mean that women didn't suffer. And the case of Kamenets Podil's ghetto and testimony of survivor Clara is a very clear evidence of that. During her you see her testimony to Soviet authorities. She mentioned the list of Jewish women and girls who were forced basically to trade themselves in order to get out from this ghetto and find some food, because they were hungry, their family members were hungry, and they made this, deal with the devil, meaning local Ukraine policeman who was a guardian and who abused his power and took advantage of the situation. And those desperate women cried and tell about what they did, in forced to make those choices in order to survive. Rina made her choice to trade her body to local capo in order to save her mom. because she was left only with her mom in Lviv during the Second World War. And this couple knew her very well. They both pretend to be Christians. It was their survival strategy during the war. And he found out and he promised her to basically to renounce her, to call her out, and she decided to deal with this in this manner. And it's very interesting to hear to her story and how she's, making sense of what she did, and she even blamed herself for this choice because of all these stereotypes and because of this social pressure and sexual norms and this sexual morality that we Jewish women faced during the war and after the war that we actually heard at the beginning of our lecture. Another story told by Henry, and this story actually says a lot about inversion of gender roles during the war. Gender roles before the war were, in many cases, very patriarchal, especially in pre-war Ukraine Jewish society. Even when we are talking about city like Lviv and towns like Ternopil and Bucha and other small shtetls, Ukraine shtetls, where men were breadwinners, head of families, and women were primarily housekeepers and mothers. Here we see war changed gender roles. Women were breadwinners, women were rescuers, women were those who had bigger chances for survival and founding some means for survival, and their body and their sexuality became this very powerful instrument. And here we see how Henry reached the farm of one locals and asked him to hide him, but at the same time his sister Sarah was already hiding there. So this farmer proposed a deal, basically, and Sarah made a choice. So she sacrificed her in order to save her brother. So we see this, inversion of those gender roles, and we see she will do it. Yes, and will save both of us. Yes, and it's very dramatic choice for her, but it's very conscious choice, and she was very well aware. They were both aware about the consequences of this choice. So we are talking about many, many, many shadows of those choices during the Holocaust. And the final point of this of my presentation, I want to say that in our introduction, we heard a lot about shaming of many Holocaust survivors, female survivors after the war. They were asked how they survived. Their sexual behavior was questioned. They were blamed sometimes for so-called sexual collaboration with the enemy, or with the Germans, or with the local collaborators. But in many cases, they were forced to do that by elderly members of Jewish communities. Like here, in this case, in case of Zita, Yeah, she became basically a victim of these circumstances. Yeah, when elderly Jews came to her and asked her to be a lover of local gendarmerie in Kopai Gorod ghetto in order to save other members, other fellow Jews. And my second point today, agency of Jewish women was expressed not only during the Holocaust in terms of sexual violence, resistance to sexual violence, and finding different survival strategy, but also during after the Holocaust, when women were trying to fight for justice for them and other victims of sexual violence who were silenced by death or were not ready to fight for justice. After the war, Soviet Union was instrumentalizing this gendered suffering of Jewish women. They organized show trials where they didn't care about their identity and about personality of female survivors. They published their names. They published every single details about their rape. Why? Because they wanted to put in trial local perpetrators, especially if they were members of Ukraine nationalist underground movement. And for example, you hear
Marta, you have to conclude.
Yes, yes. And my final thought, Clara's story is one of the most powerful story in this regard, one of the most inspiring story of Jewish female agency after the Second World War, because Clara, here you see her on this grave mass, the site of a mass shooting where her relatives were killed, and where she and other 15 Jewish girls were picked up and were raped during this night, and she was the one who survived, and she managed to put on trial her perpetrator, Andrusiv, who was back then a leader, a head of local police. And this show trial was organized. He was a facilitator of this mass rape, and she became a voice of those 16 Jewish girls and women who were perpetrated and sexually violated by Germans. Her voice was very powerful, and thanks to her, locals and other people learn about victimization, sexual victimization of Jewish women during the Holocaust. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Marta. It was very, very interesting. Before we start our questions to our excellent presenters, I would like just to make two little comments. Number one, not only women, but also men had the horrifying ritual when they entered the camp, forced nudity, shaving, etc. And then, of course, non-Jewish women also were raped, brutalized as a routine of life in the camp and also as a routine of war. Women are always the victims. Now, you, Marta, mentioned the scream. Did you scream or not? Was it sex or a rape? So I wanted, and here I'm going to end all my comments, to remind all of us that in Jewish tradition, if the woman doesn't scream, it's not a rape. And we have it in the Bible, the story about Tamar. She went out, so she was raped because she was looking for it. She didn't scream. And you don't have to be a psychologist to know that when we are in horror, not always we have our voice. So the scream doesn't work. So thank you so much for all the presenters. And now we start with our questions. I saw a hand and then I don't see it anymore. Somebody wanted to ask.
Eva Fogelman.
Eva, are you with us?
Yeah.
You wanted to ask
Unmute yourself.
something.
Eva, unmute yourself. No, we cannot hear you.
And also Bev is here, and she wants also a
Daniel,
question.
can we have
First,
your help?
first I wanted to say that um, thanks to Carol Rittner, we have who edited a book with John Roth, Rape as a Weapon in War and Genocide. And Marta, I assume you're familiar with the book and are using it in your classrooms. One of the things that is totally different about the Holocaust is that in all, and this is what I learned from Sister Carol Rittner, is that in all war and genocide situations, rape was a weapon that was legalized. And in the Holocaust, it was rape. One could not, we had the law of Rassenschande where German men could not have any even social interaction with a Jew, let alone, sexual interaction. And so we have those two things that are going on that we need to think about. And anyway, I think that's the
And
one other thing about the reason that the rape of Israeli women during October 7th became such a point of denial is because of the women's division in the United Nations that kept saying, we're not sure it's rape, we're not sure it's rape. Meanwhile, the New York Times, that's not always very favorable to Israel, kept, they did research for God knows how long, even though, we saw it right in front of our own faces. It took the United Nations Women's Organization division a very long time to finally acknowledge it. And then even then they questioned it. And this is, I think, what led to part of the denial that went on, even though everybody saw it with their own eyes on television.
thank you, Eva. Very important comments. I just wanted to reinforce what you have said. Number one, about the October 7th, what you said, it's absolutely correct. And then about the Holocaust, many of the Jewish women, I just didn't have time because it was only an introduction. It was not really a presentation.
Right.
Most of the Jewish women were not raped by Germans, but collaborators, Ukrainians, Hungarians. So, and this is what brings us to your second or first remark, that the race shame was still very important. But many of them were not raped by Germans. But once you are raped, you don't have the opportunity to say to the raper, please show me your identity card. Are you a German or a Ukrainian? Or a raper is a raper. A rapist is a rapist. Okay. So thank you so much, Eva. It was so important what you have said. Now,
I beg to differ with the Rassenschande thing.
Yeah, me too.
And there's Monica Flashgone, and she is like, she knows, and she has made the seminal thing. It was this whole, it's not a myth, but this belief about Rassenschande that prevented even talk about sexual violence of Jewish women in particular. And it was also a way of saying, we don't want to talk about it because, that would have been a Rassenschande. And it was a way to not talk about it. So I just want to interject there. It's not a clear-cut kind of thing.
I want to add to that as far as we've tried to study this Rassenschande law, it really is a very gray kind of law to be interpreted, and it was really more for consensual sex rather than for rape, number one. And number two, there were plenty of Germans that raped Jewish women in various circumstances. There were others as well, as was just pointed out clearly, but I'm not letting the German Nazis off the hook. And I mean, we have testimonies of personal sex slaves of German officers without any question. So I don't think we need to let them off the hook for rape. Okay.
If I can come in and
Bev,
ask
you
my
wanted
question.
to
Just a
say,
second.
Bev,
Let's
Thank you,
make
if
an
I can.
order. Lily, let's make an
Thank
order.
you.
I see
Bev?
Ellen. Ellen is raising her hand.
but also
And
Bev
then,
raised her
and then,
hand.
just a second. Monica, Bev, and Michelle. Yes?
My hand was up right from the beginning, if I may
Right, I
make my
think
comment.
that we should give
Okay, Bev.
Bev
Okay,
the
so
chance
Ellen,
to
just a
react.
second. Let's Bev answer. And then
Okay,
Ellen, Monica, and Michelle.
it's just a
Bev,
quick
please go
thought
ahead.
to remind us. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, just a quick thought to remind us. We've talked about women who survived rape, but probably the majority of women who were raped during the Holocaust were killed. And we do
Right.
not know how to hear the voices of the dead. So I think we need to remember. And by the way, the idea of Rassenschade, if it had any impact, it probably meant that those who were raped were killed, more likely not to be able to reveal who their rapist was. So we do not know this, but we can assume perhaps that played some part in it. But let's just remember that the majority of the women who were raped were probably killed and did not survive.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Bev. It's a very important remark. Okay, who is
Ellen,
next?
Ellen, unmute yourself, Ellen. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you to everyone. First of all, I'm going to try to be concise. I just want to mention nobody has brought up the partisans, and there seems to be at least some testimony that being with the partisans didn't make you safe. You were
On the
raped.
contrary,
Yeah. So I'm just mentioning that. Second, 25 years plus of speaking to child survivors, I always ask, did you see anything sexual? I didn't say rape, I just said sexual. Pretty consistently, they said, well, there was a giggle, and then, yes, I did. But I was so young, I don't think I realized what I was seeing at the time. It was only as an adult that I thought back that I realized what I was seeing. So I think that supports it. It's much more widespread than might have been realized. The other point, I think, again, going back to the previous historians, older maybe isn't the right term, very often they're very suspicious of oral history as a sole source. They want documentation, and that's fair enough. But when there's no documentation, what do? You don't just discount what people have said. And I think that's one of the reasons that, and not the only one, that this wasn't explored. If you asked about a transport, you could get a transport list. You got the documentation on it. And I do see some people nodding, so they know what I'm talking about. In terms of October 7th, beyond Jew hatred, which I'm going to say flat out it is, I think when you deny, it makes your life easy. You don't have to investigate it. You don't have to admit you were wrong. You don't have to change your worldview or anything like that. Not because I support this. I am saying I think on the side of people that refuse to acknowledge it, that taking the easiest way out. And those are some of the reasons. You can agree or disagree. I see Ava nodding her head, so maybe she agrees with me. So I'm throwing it out there. Voila, there you are. Thank you.
Thank you. We have
Monica?
two people, and then we have to conclude our meeting. Yes, Monica, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for doing this. It's nice to see so many people attending and some people I haven't seen for a long time. I wanted to respond to Stephen's question about the 100 female survivors of Auschwitz were randomly interviewed, what percent would say. I think the premise of the question is problematic. First of all, I don't know why we need a percentage. I don't know how many makes the percentage valuable. I think it's a risky, slip-slidey question that you say we need numbers. So the study of sexual violence is largely not quantitative. So when you ask survivors, there are too many variables. It tends to depend on if they're comfortable with the interviewer, and we've heard how they frequently weren't. Sometimes family members are in the house when they're being interviewed and they won't talk about it. Like there are just too many variables for that to be a question that we can answer. Furthermore, I would add, why do we need to answer that? Secondly, there are ways that we can count, not so much for Jewish women, but there are thousands of legal cases, trials of German soldiers, Germans in Germany, Poles and ethnic Germans in occupied territories who are on trial for rape and child abuse and all kinds of sexual violence crimes. So in that way, we can get at least how many people went on trial, but we don't know how many accusations there are. So I don't know how useful that would be. You can't really talk about punishment quantitatively because the judges are different. So there's going to be some individual aspect to that. So I think the numbers approach might be problematic. We have to look at the language that the survivors we have do use, and then we can look at the language of the judges in the military system to see what they thought about rape of certain kinds of people. Thank you. Oh, wait, I had a question just to throw out there. I'm now working also on, or I have been on child sexual abuse. And I noticed that a lot of time we say women and girls. My question is, when we talk about women as the body of the nation and the various reasons that Marta mentioned for why women are targeted, are children just little women in this concept, or do we need to think about them differently? Sorry if I was shouting. I was trying to go really fast.
I would
Thank you.
rather hear Michelle's question, okay? Because your question, Monica, will keep us at least an hour. So, Michelle,
Yeah, can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, my name is Sonja Michelle. I'm a professor emerita from University of Maryland. And first of all, I wanted to tell you about a conference that I'm co-organizing with Susanna Heschel and Anna Carroll and Augustin next week, Monday and Tuesday, at Harvard. Most of it is going to be relatively closed, partly for security reasons, but we are webcasting one session on Monday evening, and I just put the Zoom up on the chat. So if you want to see that panel, please join us for that. And Marta, maybe you'll join us. You're close by. I hope so. Two points. One, Lily, to you, you mentioned there were a lot of queer victims, and I wonder whether the motivation in the rape or sexual abuse of queer victims is different from that of some of the other theories that we've heard about, namely the attack on reproduction, male honor, that sort of thing, whether the victimization of queer people into sexual violence is different. So that's one question. And the second, to go back to Eva Folkelman and other people, and I know this wasn't the topic of today, but I think it's important to think about differences of motivation for sexual violence over time and in different historical situations, and that the culture that the perpetrators bring, the sexual culture, the morality that perpetrators bring to situations of sexual violence differs over time, whether you're Christian, whether it's Christian anti-Semitism, or in the case of October 7th, whether it's Islamist hostility toward Jews, and whether whether or not Israel, my understanding is that Israel is relatively free, certainly compared to Islamism, when it comes to sexual morality, and whether that was not particularly offensive to members of Hamas, and whether that motivated them in particular, that it was a way of saying, okay, you want to be sexually liberated, we'll show you what that means. And whether that, colored the motivation. And that then leads to why so many feminists have denied, American feminists, a movement of which I was a founding member, and a founding member of women's studies. So many people in my former departments have denied the rapes, and is it because of their sympathies for the Palestinians and for Hamas that prevents them? Let's call a spade a spade. I mean, that prevents them from acknowledging what happened on October 7th.
I think that since people are leaving, we should end here, and maybe
I'm sorry, but someone is in the room that we really have to acknowledge, and we didn't see her. Rochelle and I would like to acknowledge Judy Cohen of Toronto. She is the person who started the website on women and the Holocaust. Judy, where are you?
There she is, Judy.
There she is, Judy.
And
love
Judy,
you, love you,
Judy
love
is
you.
a Holocaust survivor. She may be the only one watching it.
She was in Auschwitz, and she is the feminist scholar.
A
Thank you,
feminist
Judy.
scholar of the Holocaust for decades and decades, and we love Judy. Okay.
So thank you, Judy, for being with us. I think that we have just started discussing the point, and there is space for maybe another panel to go on the discussion. But since we are getting late and people are leaving, I think that this is the proper time to conclude and to say a big thank you for all our speakers and all our friends who attended the meeting. I wish you a very pleasant evening, night, or morning, depends where you are. And we are going to re-meet on April 28th with a panel dedicated to Dutch women in the Holocaust under the mentoring of Professor Carol Rittner. So thank you so much and see you then.
I have just a second. I have just one remark. I hear that some of you have information about conferences about this topic. Please let us know ahead of time. Maybe we will, I don't know, participate or something. And you can do it through the Remember the Women Institute and
WISC.
WISC. And we would be very happy. I'm sorry, I said WISC.
No, you said Remember the Women.
I said WISC as well.
So I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. WISC, we are WISC. And
so this is the point. Okay, so thank you so much.
You can send it to us and we will expand it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, friends who were in the audience too. We saw you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Bye-bye. Thank you.